The actual story behind the Rwandan genocide began in the early 1990s, a time of political tension and ethnic divide in the country. Rwanda was a nation divided between two main ethnic groups, the Hutus and the Tutsis. Despite sharing common culture and language, deep-seated prejudice and political manipulations fueled animosity between the two groups. This crisis reached its climax in April 1994 when the tiny Central African nation was torn apart by one of the darkest chapters in human history, the Rwandan genocide. Hundreds of thousands of Rwandese were massacred within a space of 100 days. But while the massacre was being unleashed, the international community looked the other way. In this edition of History Media, we dive into how the Rwandan genocide happened, why it happened, and the role of the international community. Please come with me, Gabriel here. We begin the story with decades of ethnic tension that built up between the Hutus and the Tutsis, leading to the genocide. Rwanda is a small country with an overwhelmingly agricultural economy. As at the early 1990s, Rwanda had one of the highest population densities in Africa. About 85% of its population was Hutu, while the rest were Tutsi. The country also had a small number of Twa, a pygmy group who were the original inhabitants of Rwanda. Between 1897 and 1918, Rwanda was part of the German East Africa, but it became a Belgian trusteeship under a League of Nations mandate after World War I, along with neighboring Burundi. And at that time, it was called Rwanda-Urundi. Meanwhile, tension began to build up when Belgium's colonial policy made it possible for the minority to oppress the majority. The minority Tutsis were favored over the majority Hutus. First, this inter-ethnic rivalry and tension exploded into violence in 1959, even before the country gained independence. The Hutu Revolution in 1959 forced over 330,000 Tutsis to flee the country, making them an even smaller minority. By early 1961, victorious Hutus has forced the Tutsi monarch of Rwanda into exile and declared the country a republic. After a United Nations referendum that same year, Belgium officially granted independence to Rwanda in July 1962. In the years following independence, ethnic violence continued. In 1973, a military group brought Major General Juvenal Habyarimana, a moderate Hutu, into power. After gaining power, Habyarimana was able to set up a one-party state in which tight central control was joined with a successful push for economic development. But by the late 1980s, after a decade and a half in power, his political control was eroding and the economy was in trouble. In 1990, forces of the Rwandan Patriotic Front, the RPF, consisting mainly of Tutsi refugees, invaded Rwanda from Uganda. At that time, Habyarimana accused Tutsi residents of being RPF accomplices and arrested hundreds of them. Between 1990 and 1993, government officials directed attacks at the Tutsis. This would lead to the death of hundreds of them. Meanwhile, efforts to end the hostilities led to negotiations between government and RPF in 1992, resulting in the Arusha Peace Accords. In August 1993, Habyarimana signed an agreement at Arusha, Tanzania, calling for the creation of a transitional government that would include the RPF. But he was not allowed to see the implementation of the agreement. A horrible action was taken against him. He was killed with a surface-to-air missile attack on his plane in April 1994. While some would believe his death was orchestrated by Hutu extremists to prevent the power-sharing agreement, others place responsibility for this attack on the RPF. This would trigger the worst massacre in history, the Rwandan genocide. If you enjoy this story so far, please like this video and subscribe to the channel for more interesting African history stories. Thank you. Within hours of the presidential plane crash, the Presidential Guard, along with members of the Rwandan Armed Forces, the Interahamwe militia, and the Impuzamugambi, set up roadblocks and barricades. After that, they began to slaughter Tutsis and moderate Hutus with absolute impunity. Meanwhile, the Interahamwe militia were a Hutu extreme militia group, meaning those who attack together, while Impuzamugambi means those who have the same goal. Among the first victims of the genocide were the moderate Hutu Prime Minister Agatha Nwuligiamana and her husband, along with 10 Belgian peacekeepers. They were killed on April 7. The death of the president and the violence that followed created a political vacuum. However, on the 9th of April 1994, an interim government of extreme Hutu power leaders from the military high command stepped in to fill the vacuum. The killing of the Belgian peacekeepers, however, provoked the withdrawal of Belgian troops, and the United Nations directed that peacekeepers should therefore defend themselves thereafter. The mass killings, which started in Kigali, quickly spread to the rest of Rwanda. During the first 2 weeks of the pogrom, local administrators in central and southern Rwanda resisted the genocide, and at that time, most Tutsis lived in these areas. After April 18, national officials removed or killed those who resisted the killings. Thereafter, some opponents of the mass killings became silent, while others actively led the killings. Those who carried out the killing were rewarded with food, drinks, drugs, and money. The reward to these people came from government officials. Meanwhile, government-sponsored radio stations started calling on ordinary Rwandan civilians to murder their neighbors. Within a space of 100 days, more than 800,000 people had been murdered. On the other hand, the RPF resumed fighting and civil war raged along the genocide. By the early July, forces of the RPF had gained substantial control over the country, including the capital, Kigali. As a consequence, more than 2 million people, nearly all Hutus, fled Rwanda and crowded into refugee camps in Zaire, now the Democratic Republic of the Congo, and other neighboring countries. After its victory, the RPF established a coalition government similar to that agreed upon at Arusha, with Pastor Bizimungu, a Hutu, as president and Paul Kagame, a Tutsi, as vice president and defense minister. Habyarimana's party, the National Revolutionary Movement for Development, the NRMD, which had played a key role in organizing the genocide, was outlawed. In 2003, a new constitution was adopted that eliminated any reference to ethnicity. On the 25th of August 2003, Paul Kagame was elected into a 10-year term as the president of Rwanda. This became the first ever legislative election in the country. Meanwhile, even though the RPF was able to stop the genocide from reaching its completion, their victory was not clean either. A Human Rights Watch assessment of the RPF campaign concluded that systematic killings claimed tens of thousands of Hutu lives. These were called revenge killings by the oppressed. Moreover, the chain reaction of Habyarimana's death and the Rwandan genocide contributed to the conflict in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, the DRC. The war became one of the deadliest since the Second World War. It was a continuation of the Hutu-Tutsi conflict and became worse when over 2 million Hutus fleeing Rwanda attacked Tutsis in the DRC. Some of the 2 million people were militiamen. As the government of Paul Kagame supported local Tutsi forces, the conflict escalated. Unlike other mass killings that happened before the Rwandan genocide, such as the Holocaust, the international community had advanced information of the impending genocide, but nothing was done to stop it. Even as the genocide began, the international community did nothing to end it. It is said that General Romeo Dallaire, commander of the United Nations Observer Force tasked with implementing the peace agreement, heard that the Hutus were planning genocide in January 1994. He informed the authorities at the United Nations but was not permitted to act. Even after the genocide began and the evidence of slaughter became undeniable, the international community did not intervene. General Darare believes with additional 5,000 troops and a stronger United Nations mandate, he could have saved hundreds of thousands of people. Meanwhile, as report of the genocide spread, the Security Council voted in May to supply a more robust force, including more than 5,000 troops. But by the time that force arrived in full, however, the genocide had been over for months. The failure to intervene in Rwanda would become the greatest regret of Bill Clinton's presidency. Paul Kagame is still the president of Rwanda at the time of recording this video, 30 years after the genocide and 24 years after becoming the country's leader. His record has been extraordinarily mixed. He has done an incredible job helping to rebuild life in Rwanda since the genocide. But he has also been accused of sponsoring violence across the region. Many have also accused him of plotting the assassination of President Laurent Desire Kabila of the Democratic Republic of the Congo. So, click here for the story of the assassination of President Laurent Desire Kabila of the DRC and the part Kagame played in his assassination. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to History Media for more interesting African history stories. And I'll see you in the next one. Thank you very much for watching. Peace.